Hello and welcome to what I believe is the most comprehensive guide to PvE tanking that you will find anywhere on the intertubes. This is part one of a 4-part series looking at how to tank, how to gear, how to mod, and how to play. So if you're keen on that, then stick around and I'll tell you all about it. Guys, welcome, it's Skill Up here, and today I'm proud to be bringing you part one of my 4-part series looking at how to properly tank PvE content in the Division. With incursions now out, I've been getting a ton of questions around this, so I wanted to put together a guide on it. The problem was that the guide that I made, there was so much in it that the final video came to about 30 minutes, which obviously is just too damn long. So I've cut it up into a series of videos that I hope you'll find both useful and properly digestible. I'll be releasing the videos over the course of the coming week, so check back regularly to see when a new one has been released. In this video, I'm going to highlight some of the pros and cons associated with tanking in its current form before offering an explanation as to why I don't think you should actually be tanking right now. Yep, you heard me. Tanking in its current form is in a really bad place, and I want to offer you that advice before you spend time watching the other 3 videos I've made on this topic, rather than surprise you at the very end after you've sat through 30 minutes of me talking at you. So if you're keen to understand what these limitations are associated with tanking, then stick around. But if you've made up your mind and you've decided you want to do it, then feel free to skip this video as we start getting to the sort of how-to stuff in the next video. This series has actually been my biggest endeavor to date, eclipsing even my DPS calculation video in terms of the raw number of hours that's gone into it. So if you like this and you find it useful, then please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe for more Division content from yours truly. So let's start out from the very beginning. What is the point of tanking in the Division? Well, if you've ever played an MMO like World of Warcraft or Guild Wars or whatever, the concept of tanking here in the Division is fairly similar. Tanking should have a few core benefits. Firstly, it should ideally let you control the flow of an engagement. You generally can, push enemies out of cover, herd them to positions that are advantageous for your group, and so on. A byproduct of the above is that it should protect your backline DPS and support, as they'll generally be taking significantly less damage since most aggro is directed towards you, the tank. And of course, the byproduct of that is that your DPS should then be able to get on with the job of damaging rather than needing to drop down behind cover to avoid damage. In theory, this will mean your team will be doing more net DPS than if all 4 of you were constantly ducking, dodging, diving, dodging, and dodging. It also ideally means that they should be able to gear for more DPS and forego some of their survivability, safe in the knowledge that you are there to protect them. Now, this is a description of how tanking should work in the Division, but the reality of this is far from ideal, and I want to spend a few minutes breaking down the reasons for this disconnect. Firstly, on the topic of controlling encounters and positioning enemies. This works some of the time, and it doesn't work a hell of a lot more often. Enemy AI is notoriously unpredictable, and at any point, the one enemy that you have on you can suddenly dash away to cover or decide to attack someone else, or so on. Enemies that you think you should be able to push out of cover sometimes remain staunchly in place, and pushing them to different positions can have the impact of them now being out of line of sight of your DPS, meaning that DPS need to reposition in order to engage. Which brings us neatly to the second point, protecting your DPS and support so that they take less damage. Is this possible? Well, sometimes. The fact of the matter is you do not have a reliable single target or AoE taunt available to you, meaning that if shotgunners come barging through and one of them happens to ignore you, which believe me happens all the time, you have very few tools available to you to capture their attention. What's worse is that repositioning yourself to protect your backline is extremely fraught with danger, as your build, which I'll discuss later, essentially forces you to run with a fairly low amount of stamina, meaning the moment that you turn your back on your enemies when you are tanking and no longer have your shield up, you will often die in a matter of seconds. What makes all of this even more challenging is that you have no tools available to you to taunt range mobs such as snipers and the drones that are now in the incursions. This essentially means that your DPS are constantly under threat of getting attacked by these range mobs, meaning that the supposed protection you provide isn't nearly as valuable as it should be. All of this culminates in a failure to deliver on the promise of point 3, which is allowing your DPS to DPS harder by staying out of cover for longer, or by building glass cannon, or by at least investing more heavily in their DPS rather than their survivability when it comes to their gear. Given that short-range mobs can rush your DPS at any time, and given that long-range mobs can almost one-shot them if they so choose, DPS cannot confidently forego survivability stats, safe in the knowledge that you are there to protect them. Additionally, the DPS compromise that you and your party need to make in order to have you around is really huge. You do very, very little damage compared to your teammates because you need to dump all of your stats into electronics to maintain your Ballistic Shield's health. And you need to run heal as your other ability to keep yourself alive, meaning that you can't translate that high electronics into DPS through things like sticky bomb or seeker mines. When using your shield, you are only able to use a pistol or sawn-off shotgun, and there isn't nearly enough damage bonus modifier on the Ballistic Shield ability to bring your DPS to a respectable level. You really are just a walking wall when you spec tank, and not much else. So that's the playstyle and utility. Let's talk now about itemization. Alright, so let me say this from the outset that I think the way that tanks are forced to gear in this game is really poorly optimized. In essence, the only way to tank is with your shield, and the only way to get your shield to where it needs to be is to sacrifice a huge amount of stamina and firearms to do it, because you need to drop a ton of stats into electronics. This means that when my shield is up, I'm a strong and able contributor to my team, but when my shield is down, I'm essentially just waiting behind cover trying to suppress enemies while I wait for my shield to come off cooldown. It would have been nice to find some sort of middle ground where I could take some damage without relying on my shield, but this really isn't the case. A simple change like letting your Ballistic Shield scale with your stamina instead of your electronics would have completely turned this build on its head and made it far more playable and viable from an itemization perspective. But sadly, this is not the case, and you spend most of your time walking around with the same or less HP than your average firearms or electronics focused player. And let's not even talk about weapon talents and how inaccessible they are to you. If you have a look through weapon talents, you'll find the majority of them do not benefit tanks at all. The ones that do benefit tanks are generally locked behind firearms requirements that you have no hope of reaching since you are putting so much of your gear into our electronics. So there's just a massive itemization gap from a weapons perspective. And it's also the case, finally, that serious endgame content like challenge modes and high-level Dark Zone mobs require a very tailored and specific gear set to properly tank. So tanking really opens up to you as an option after you've collected a ton of drops, materials, blueprints, Phoenix credits, etc. If you're a newly leveled level 30 character hoping to tank challenge modes, you can pretty much forget about that right now. You're probably going to need a good 20 to 30 or so hours of gear grinding to get your gear to where it needs to be to do this properly. And I'll be honest in saying that you are far better off spending this time developing a firearms or skill power based set than a tank set. So the utility is low and the barriers to entry are high. Is there anything redeemable about tanking? Yes, there totally is. The truth is, it's just pretty damn fun. You can very often stop shotgunners dead in their tracks, giving your team the opportunity to murder them ruthlessly. You can go toe-to-toe with those big minigun wielding guards and tank them while your team fill his skull with hot SMG lead. Your shield can bash foes and in effect stun lock them, which is super fun and can be very rewarding. But just because something is fun doesn't mean it is viable, and so it is with tanking. As it stands, PvE tanking is very undercooked. It has huge potential as it can feel great, and when it works, but the significant mechanical and itemization gaps coupled with the very high barriers to entry and sacrifices required make it a spec that's really only fun to use when you are mucking about with your friends rather than a useful tool in your arsenal. But if you are like me and you still want to try it out anyway, then click through to the next video, which you'll see linked on screen, and I'll tell you about how to get as close to usability as possible when it comes to this spec. In this next video, which will be available tomorrow, we'll talk about the best abilities and talents for this Shield Bro spec, so don't miss out on that one. And guys, if you found this analysis and advice useful, then I'm really pleased and I'd love for you to drop a like and subscribe. I'll see you guys either in the next video or in the Dark Zone, or both. Take care until then. Bye-bye.